Astghik, thank you so much for joining me again. How are you doing today?
So far, so good. Thank you. Nice to be back.
Great to have you back. We're going to be talking about this question today, what makes me who I am? So talking about identity. I find this question really interesting and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it too. Because on the face of it, maybe like many questions in philosophy, sounds really obvious at first, doesn't it? What makes you who you are? Oh, okay, well, there's different aspects of my identity that comprise me. We are each an individual person and we can be identified by various different things. So what's the issue? What's the complexity? What makes this a big philosophical question? So maybe we could start there. Why is it a difficult question to answer?
I like your first option. We just prop it up there and say, no.
That's it. Cool. See you
Yeah.
next time.
But it's something I think most people come back to every now and then. This question, who are we? Well, I guess the only qualified people to answer this question would be our exes. That'd be in the front row seat. I'm kidding. We wouldn't give them any seat at all. Who are we? I think we're a mix. I'd like to think of ourselves as like an equation. We are like a mix of variables and constants. Variables being things that change our upbringing, our education, environment, culture. And then for me personally, the foundation of identity is something constant, which is consciousness. And perhaps we can also, I don't know if we can say it's a constant, but genes are also something that really don't change. So personal identity for me, it's a mix of all these things, some of which may change during the time, but some are just constant. The foundation for all of us is the same. The attributes are a bit different. External attributes are different.
I really like the words that you've used there. You referred to this idea of something constant versus something changing. And I think that gets to the crux of the issue with philosophers, because I totally agree with you. I do think we're a mixture of things. And I think to say otherwise would be a bit bizarre because humans are multifaceted. We're complex creatures and there's not just one thing that makes us up. But I think the issue, as far as I can tell, that philosophers have with it is if you were to get rid of every other element of what makes a person, still there surely has to be one thing left that would still be you, regardless of whether you got rid of everything, if that makes sense. So they're looking for the thing that's really the fundamental part of you. So again, if you got rid of everything else about this person, what would be the one thing that would have to be left behind so that you could still say that person was that person? That, I think, is what makes it difficult. Like you said, with reference to change as well, this is where the idea of the paradox of identity comes in. And as we know, as we've talked about with other subjects, philosophers love a paradox. You're quite good, actually, I think, at questioning this idea of whether there really is a paradox or not. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether the paradox of identity is a true paradox. How can I always be changing and yet still be me? I think that's what they're getting at. So do you think that's a real paradox, or do you think it's another one of those fake paradoxes, if you like?
Well, I think what makes this a paradox is the fact that we see the change, like at least physically, we see
Yeah.
that we change, our cells change, our environment, beliefs, even mentally and spiritually, we change. You know, when they say you can't run away from yourself, there's something that you always carry with yourself, something that's with you all the time. I don't think of it as a paradox because paradox implies that there is some contradiction. They go hand in hand, they complement each other. When I say it's constant, what I mean is we change, but we just become more aware of that constant. It's just unfolding and revealing other aspects of itself. Traditionally, in conventional way, it is a paradox, but it's fine. It's natural, I think. It shouldn't bother us. We shouldn't be thinking about why is it happening. We shouldn't spend so much energy on this.
That's fair enough. I mean, in a way, it kind of reminds me of the idea that the world is a constantly changing place in the same way that humans are. And that doesn't seem to be something that a lot of philosophers have had an issue with. Maybe Plato, which we'll come back to, because Plato, ancient Greek philosopher, very famous, did have a bit of an issue with this because he thought that things that constantly changed were not a reliable source of truth. And he put the body in that category as well. He said that if we define ourselves by our physical side, if you like, our body, in other words, that's a problem because, first of all, there's questions like, for example, if I were to lose a limb, am I still me? If I don't have my arm anymore or my leg, can I say it's still me? If I get a prosthetic leg or arm or whatever it might be, is that part of me or not? You know, so there's loads of different questions you could ask with that. I think where it becomes interesting is when it's illustrated through things like analogies. The TED Ed video that we referred to earlier has the whole Ship of Theseus paradox. What is the original ship? Is it the one that's been meticulously maintained over time, even though none of the original parts are there? Or is it a different one that has more of the original parts, even if it's not all of them because they've gone? So I thought we could actually watch a video, if that's okay, from the TV show Only Fools and Horses. That's a more concise and humorous version, really, of the Ship of Theseus. It gets more interesting when we apply it to humans. So you mentioned this idea that we can physically see changes that we undergo. And I think a classic question you could ask is, are you the same person now as you were at the age of 3? There's quite a stark contrast there, but you could even talk about it on a smaller scale. Are you the same person today as you were yesterday?
Well, going back to the broom, it is the same because the person believes it is. I think it's a bit different when it's an inanimate object because it's up to us. We give importance to it and we perceive it the way it is. Yeah, he should get the OT award. Why not? Yeah, well deserved. And he maintained it. Like he changed a lot of things, and he took care of the broom.
And it's still
After
his
all.
technically as well. So even if the parts are different, it still triggers broom, so to speak, in terms of who possesses it, what it's
Yeah,
being used for, because he sees it as the same broom. Maybe there's something to do with our perception of what's the same and what's not, even if that perception is different from reality.
yeah, exactly. The question about me and being the same, anyone actually. I think again, it depends on what you believe is your foundation, who you think you are, what's more important. For a lot of people, a big part of personal identity, for example, is their cultural identity or their upbringing or their religion. So it depends which one is dominant. Me personally, I think I want to think of my identity as consciousness. In that sense, I am the same person. But as I said, with life, with experience, with just time, I guess, I just become more aware of that. And I like it. I like the process of revealing, understanding the consciousness more and being more in tune with the consciousness of myself. In that sense, I would say I am the same person, not physically. It doesn't mean my beliefs haven't changed or some important things for me haven't changed. They have, but not that they've changed. I think I've just come closer to the truth. Things were probably imposed on me subconsciously. I'm not saying anyone forced anything on me, but I just absorbed this from the environment, from genes. When they say life is more about unlearning than learning, I agree with it. I think I've learned a lot of stuff and I've become more myself, more true to myself, a more pure version of that. There's a long way to go. Don't get me wrong. I'm not there yet, but the essence is the same. Let's put it that way.
I agree with you. I think all of us, and it's not necessarily a diabolical thing, it's just we're all conditioned by various different elements of life, whether it be our upbringing or society, culture, whatever it might be. I really like this idea that a lot of it's about unlearning rather than learning. If we think about it in terms of trying to find what you really enjoy, for example, I feel like a lot of people struggle with that. I think this is where we could tie it into questions like what's the meaning of life or how can I find my purpose in life? Because I think when we're younger, before you get conditioned to too great an extent, you actually have quite a good handle or very good handle on what you actually enjoy. You don't worry about what people think about things. You just crack on with stuff. When you're a kid, you don't feel really self-conscious about how do I look when I'm playing, and you just get on with it. And I think that's something
Exactly.
we lose as adults. Would you agree?
Yes, 100%. I think our mind is freer when we're younger. We don't have baggage, but we can keep that. We should try at least to keep that state. For myself, for example, I always try to look at myself not through the lenses of culture or education or family, but just think of myself like, okay, if I didn't have any of this, if I didn't have my name, my last name, my nationality, who would I be? And that gives me a lot of freedom. I'm not saying those things are bad, don't get me wrong. For humans, it's great to have that sense. It's a sense of belonging, which helps us survive. We should have it, but we shouldn't let it control us. I just try to get rid of all these attributes. That's when I feel myself. It makes me free. It doesn't limit me in anything. At least I want to think that there's no such thing that I wouldn't do, wouldn't try, wouldn't like to change. But I don't know if that changes with maybe age. I guess it's harder to fight it with the age, but I try to. It makes me happy.
And that's a practical way to think about it, isn't it? Like, what can we do in terms of thinking about this question that can improve our lives, improve our well-being? I really like your point about stripping away everything that we think we are or have even, because I think a lot of the time we identify ourselves by what we own. I'm a homeowner. I have this job. I have this relationship. I have this family even. And even though those things are important, being able to look and think, who would I be if I got rid of all of those? It reminds me of Buddhism, this idea of not trying to be attached to everything like we've talked about before, non-attachment, and this idea that actually those things don't define me. They might be part of my life, but they're not effectively what I am. And I think that's why it's really difficult. Even if you introduce yourself at a party, right? Like the way that people talk about each other or to each other when they first meet, I feel like the typical question people will ask to get to know someone is what do you do? Like what is your job? But people don't really say who are you? But you don't really get that question as much, do
Yeah,
you?
no, but I think it's good because if I got asked that question, I'd be stuck. I wouldn't know what to
Same.
say.
Yeah, if someone's like, who are you?
Who
I'd
are
be
you?
like, I probably would default to my job, actually, because I think
Yeah,
that's normally the starting point, isn't it, for people? But you don't normally hear people say things like, I am a wife or a mother or, like all of those things,
exactly.
because
Yeah.
even though those things are interesting and important, it doesn't seem to be the thing that we use to identify ourselves. So I do think society plays a big role in determining maybe not exactly who we are on a fundamental, more conscious based level, like you say, because I think that's the true essence of you. But society definitely has a big say, in my opinion, in how we identify ourselves and how we identify other people. Are you the same person now as you were at the age of 3?
Mhm.
Normally, when people ask that question, they're asking it to point out the obvious physical change that you would have undergone. But in a way, could you say that, if anything, you were more of yourself at the age of 3 because you didn't have the societal expectations on you at that point and you weren't being conditioned as much compared to now?
That's a very good question. Yes, because they say children are the purest. Yes, but the thing is, you don't realize it at the age of 3. you're not aware. And I'd rather be aware of it and try to keep that purity rather than have that but not be aware of it. It's
Fair
like when
point.
you have something you don't appreciate, what good is it? Learning about it and learning about yourself and unfolding, revealing different parts. It's a beautiful journey. You know, when people say, I'd like to go back to my childhood, I'd like to be 5 years old again and stay a child forever. I don't think I would like that for the same reason, because I wouldn't be aware of that this is happiness. I'm carefree. I don't have anything to worry about, no job, nothing. So I wouldn't want to go back. I really like becoming more aware.
That's fair enough. I think it's the whole grass is greener on the other side idea, isn't it? Because normally when
Mm,
people are kids, they're like, I can't wait till I'm a grown up and I can do whatever I
exactly.
want. And they forget about the responsibility that that comes with and the fact that you have so much more to think about. But then when you're younger, it's like, yeah, really carefree, but you lack the knowledge and the experience and the wisdom maybe that you get, or hopefully most of us get as we get older. The way that I find it helpful to think about when it comes to this question is to split identity into different parts. So we've talked about the physical side, the fact that our bodies change all the time, but it's still us, which is the paradoxical bit. But philosophers also like to bring in the mind and the soul. And I think soul could be synonymous with consciousness, perhaps, in the way that you're thinking about it. But I'd like to focus a little bit on the mind, because one of the questions that gets asked, which I find really interesting, is if you were to lose all of your memories, would you still be
Mm.
you? If you were to lose whatever you would deem to be core memories, maybe who your family is or who your loved ones are, what you do as a job, you just forget all of it, is it still you?
Because for me the foundation is consciousness, I'd say yes. But even when you lose the memory, I'm not an expert, I haven't done a lot of research on memory loss, to be honest, but I would think your genes would be the same, for example, so that wouldn't change, and they would have some influence on the way you are. In astrology, they do your chart and then they say, okay, you were born in this location at this time, and that influences your personality. So that again wouldn't change, right? Still
Mm.
be born wherever you were born and at the time you were born. So those things would remain the same and they would still be part of you. The only thing is that, you know, when I say the consciousness would be the same, I don't know if you'd be aware of it. Aware is knowledge or experience or just a state of being. I don't know if you'd lose that knowledge as well. Coming back to your question, I think you would still be the same person. You just lose the acquired qualities, your upbringing, your education, but what makes you you, I think would remain the same.
Interesting. There are some philosophers, John Locke, for example, argued that if you did lose all of your memories, it wouldn't be you anymore. But I think that I agree with you. There's still something fundamental that's separate to memory. And memory is a bit of a mystery, actually. There's loads of different lines of thinking about
Mm.
what memory is and whether it's in the brain or if it's something external, a little bit like the consciousness debate. It's similar to that. I've read cases before where people have lost their memory. Maybe they've been in an accident, they've had some kind of head trauma. They genuinely forget pretty much everything about their lives. They forget, for example, who they were in a relationship with. But it's really interesting because I've heard quite a lot of cases where they end up falling in love with the same person. So for me, that suggests that there is something that remains about that person. A big chunk of their life is gone from their mind, but I don't think it's necessarily gone from them.
Interesting. It just reminds me of something a lot of people believe in, and I think I do too, that we come here with certain purpose, not necessarily to suffer or anything, but to learn things. And maybe the fact that they fall in love with the same person is just part of it, and the universe is just trying to get them back to the right path. I think it really depends. It probably doesn't work for everyone. It might be actually a way of saying, hey, you're on the wrong path.
That ties into other lines of thinking about whether certain things in our life are predestined. One way that I've heard this talked about actually is that we do have free will in the sense that we can choose the path that we go on, but there are some things in our life that are just preordained. Whether you want to say it's by God or source, whatever you want to call it, the idea is that that thing will happen. It might not happen exactly in the way that you think, but it will happen. There's just some things in life that are inevitable. If you believe in things like soul contracts, before you've lived this life, you've agreed with another soul for that soul to play a particular role in your life. In that case, then there are certain things that are just going to happen that are going to be part of you. Earlier, I mentioned Plato and his issue, if you like, that he has with things that are constantly changing. So the human body, the world around us. He was looking for something that was a more constant source of truth, something that was essential, immaterial, incorruptible. Plato's answer to this question is the soul. A lot of scientists, certainly, and other philosophers would disagree. That might be on the grounds that they don't believe that there is such a thing as the soul, or they might not believe it to be the same kind of thing as Plato believed it to be. But there is this idea, in Plato's mind anyway, that everything about you can change, but the one thing that never changes is the soul. Is consciousness to you what soul is to Plato?
I think so. Also, the mind. To me, honestly, all three are the same. It's just one energy. It's the same. I do agree with him. Yes. I think even if everything changes about you, that fundamental thing remains the same. I like your idea about some things are predestined. The destination is probably predestined, and then the way you can choose the path. But I do believe in soul contracts. I do think we come with a purpose to learn to upgrade probably to another level. Sometimes I do have a feeling that this whole thing that's happening is a theater, like a heated argument. For example, I see two people arguing really bad. I just want to come up and say, just chill. Sometimes I can even see it in my head. We just all come up to the stage and we bow and we say thank you. I don't know if it's just my mind playing a trick on me, but I do think we shouldn't take everything that seriously. We should enjoy, make the most of it, follow our desires, follow our heart. I'm not trying to encourage negative things or bad things, but try to understand what makes you really happy. And it might not be something that's obvious at first look, but just go deep down. And it might not be accepted by anyone else, but if it makes you happy, that's what you're here for.
That point that you made, actually, the idea that this is a bit like a play or a theatre is so interesting. And I've heard quite a few other people say, I mean, Shakespeare said it, all the world's a stage. But it's interesting because I've done quite a lot of research into people who've had near-death experiences. It's really interesting when you look at people who've had particularly difficult lives. Maybe they've had some kind of childhood trauma, really quite terrible stuff. But they say that when they have the near-death experience, it gives them a new perspective on life because they actually see, they acquire this knowledge that it was all part of this plan, which sounds bonkers. It's like, why would you agree to suffer and have difficult things happen in life? But if you take it from the perspective of it's a way to, like you say, upgrade, to increase your knowledge of something, to learn some lesson in life, it does make a lot more sense. So many people have described the world in that way that you've just described it, where they've said it is a little bit like a play. When you're watching it or a movie or something, you feel like it's real. You're watching it and you're like, this is really good, that the acting's really compelling, it's amazing. I might have cried and been really tense during that, but by the end you're like, great performance. You just have a totally different perspective on it once the film's over or once the play's over. So they said life's a bit like that. When we're in it, it's very hard. Like you say, the two people arguing on the street screaming at each other, they think that is who they are and they can't not do that, right? But actually, if you take that different perspective where it's like, it's not that deep, it's not that serious, I think it's a lot healthier. Not trying to identify too much with one thing. It's maybe a Buddhist perspective on it, but that's when you run into trouble because you get attached to a particular thing that isn't really the true you.
Yeah. And I think it's the practical appliance of all this knowledge. I didn't have any near-death experience, thankfully, but even just trying to zoom out from real life, like, okay, this is happening, but what's the bigger picture? As I said, I think life is always supporting us. Everything is happening for us, not against us, or not to teach us a lesson. It's just a way to show us what we should do or what we should change, but it's not trying to punish us in any way. Even if all this is crazy and not true, I think if it helps to cope with life,
Yeah.
if it helps thinking of life as like a play or zooming out helps, I think it does. We should definitely utilize it. Sometimes it's hard, of course, when you're in a difficult situation, it's hard to zoom out. It's a tool that we can use, definitely. We can try.
Definitely. Easier said than done, but I think if we take that view of pragmatism, even if it's not necessarily strictly true, if it helps you to live a life that isn't too drama-fueled and too much difficulty in it, that gets in the way of you finding who you truly are and living your true purpose, then what's the harm? It can be really useful. Are there any other points that you'd like to add about this question of what makes me who I am?
A lot of people ask where the consciousness is in the body. I just thought it's not the consciousness that's in the body. I think consciousness is, and then the body just takes form. Really, it's everywhere, inside and outside. I just wanted to add that part. But regarding the personality, no.